The moment Aurora Marwood stepped through the obsidian doors of the Valtieri court, every immortal head in the chamber turned toward her with the same expression. Absolute certainty that she would be dead within minutes. She was not dead. She was bleeding, yes. Her left shoulder had been sliced open by the blade of Lord Caesar's guard when she had broken through the outer gate, and the crimson stain was spreading slowly through the white fabric of her jacket. Her dark hair was disheveled, tangled from running 3 city blocks through November rain. Her green eyes were wide and bright and impossibly alert. She held in her right hand a sealed envelope bearing the ancient crest of the Valtieri bloodline, pressed there by a dying man who had begged her to run. She had run. She had run through 4 underground tunnels beneath Budapest's glittering streets, slipped through 2 glamoured checkpoints, outmaneuvered a tracking vampire who had been alive since the Renaissance. And then, when every rational option failed, she had walked through the front doors of the most dangerous vampire court in Eastern Europe and announced herself by name. The court whispered around her like wind through a mausoleum. At the far end of the hall, on a throne carved from a single piece of black marble, sat Sorin Valtieri. He was exactly what they said he was, and nothing like what she had imagined. His hair was white as winter frost, falling in loose waves past his sharp jaw. His skin was pale as alabaster, almost luminous beneath the cold blue light of the chandeliers. He wore a deep charcoal suit that fit him with the precision of something made by hands that had centuries to practice the art. His eyes, dark as the space between stars, fixed on Aurora with an expression that was neither welcome nor threat. It was something rarer and more dangerous, curiosity. "The human girl has crossed into my court bleeding," he said. His voice was low and even, like the note of a cello string held just past its limit. "She carries my seal. She has survived Lord Caesar's outer perimeter, which no mortal has done in 11 years. He rose from the throne slowly, the way a tide rises, inevitable and without hurry. "Tell me your name, and tell me why you are not running." "I was running," Aurora said, and her voice did not shake. "I stopped when I got here. My name is Aurora Marwood. I was courier for a man named Petir Vasil, who is now dead, and before he died he told me this letter would mean something to you." She extended her arm, holding the envelope across the space between them. "He told me you were the only one who would not kill me for it." The court's silence deepened into something almost physical. Sorin descended the steps of the dais with unhurried grace and crossed the marble floor. He stopped 3 feet from her, close enough that she could see the precise angle of his jaw and the way the light caught the unusual darkness of his irises. He looked at the envelope, he looked at her. "Petir is dead," he said. "Yes, how?" "Lord Caesar's men. About 40 minutes ago, in a safe house on the south bank of the Danube. He had been hiding for 6 days. He had time to press the letter into my hands before they found him." She kept her gaze level. "He said the seal would protect me here. He said blood law compels the holder of a Valtieri seal to hospitality and protection until the message is delivered." He was very specific. Something shifted in Sorin's expression. Not much, but enough. "He was correct," Sorin said. He took the envelope from her hand. His fingers were cool against hers, and he did not linger, but she felt the contact like a current. "Blood law is blood law. While you stand in my court holding my seal, no blade in this room will touch you." He glanced behind her at the assembled courtiers, a single slow sweep that communicated more than a spoken command. "Anyone who disagrees is welcome to explain themselves to me personally." No one disagreed. He broke the seal on the envelope. Aurora watched his face as he read. He was careful, controlled, magnificent in his stillness. But something moved through him as he absorbed the words, something old and painful that lived just behind his composed expression. When he finished, he folded the letter precisely and tucked it inside his jacket, against his chest. "Come with me," he said, quietly enough that the court could not hear. "Where? Somewhere private. Unless you prefer to bleed on my floor in front of 40 vampires who are currently fighting their instincts." She looked down at her shoulder. The stain had spread. "Private sounds fine," she said. He led her through a side door that opened into a corridor lined with deep blue tapestries, their threads silver and old. The door closed behind them and the murmur of the court faded. Here, the air was cooler and smelled of stone and time, and the chandeliers were smaller, warmer. "Sit," he said, and gestured to a long velvet bench along the wall. She sat. He opened a cabinet built into the stone and removed a medical kit with practiced efficiency. The cabinet also contained, she noticed, a bottle of aged whiskey, which struck her as oddly human for a vampire king. "Roll back your sleeve," he said. "I can do it myself. You are shaking." "I am not shaking." He looked at her. She looked back. Then, because she was shaking, just slightly, and because it would have been foolish to argue the point purely out of pride, she let him take her arm. His touch was clinical and careful. He cleaned the wound with antiseptic that made her hiss through her teeth, and he worked without comment through her discomfort, his white head bent over her arm with the same focused attention he had given the letter. "Petter was a friend," he said, while he worked. "I know. He mentioned you, not by name, but in the way people mention someone when the name itself carries too much weight. How long had you been working for him?" 8 months. "I came to Budapest from London for the courier work. I did not know what he was connected to when I started. I figured it out gradually." She paused. "I figured out quite a lot, gradually, such as the fact that the city has 3 vampire courts operating under diplomatic truce, that the truce has been deteriorating for 2 years, that Lord Caesar has been systematically eliminating Petter's network because Petter was the primary intelligence source keeping that truce together." She watched Sorin's hands. "And that, whatever is in that letter, is the reason Caesar wanted him dead before he could deliver it." Sorin pressed a bandage to her shoulder with steady pressure and held it there. "You are not what I expected," he said. "What did you expect?" "Petter's couriers were usually frightened. Most humans who stumble into our world become very quiet and very still like rabbits." "I was frightened," Aurora said. "I am still frightened. But being frightened has never stopped me from doing what needs to be done." He secured the bandage with medical tape and released her arm. He straightened, studying her with that same quality of attention he gave to everything, thorough and careful and slightly unsettling. "The letter," he said, "contains intelligence about an assassination, specifically mine. Lord Caesar has formed an alliance with the Budapest Court of the East, and together they intend to dissolve the truce permanently by eliminating me. Without the Valtieri court, the other 2 factions consolidate, and blood law in this city collapses." He said it calmly, without drama. Petter knew because he had a source inside Caesar's inner circle. That source is now also dead. Aurora absorbed this. "So the truce depends on you staying alive. It has for 2 centuries. And Caesar's people know I was Petter's courier. They know the letter was delivered. Yes. Which means they know I know. Yes." She looked at the door through which they had come. "So I cannot simply go back out onto the street and return to my apartment." "No," Sorin said. "You cannot." She took a breath, held it, released it slowly. "All right. Then I need to know what your plan is and whether it is a good one and whether you intend to include me in it or simply lock me in a room somewhere for my own protection." Sorin looked at her for a long moment. Then, for the first time since she had entered his court, something changed in the careful stillness of his face. Not quite a smile. Something more genuine than that. "What do you know about vampire court politics?" he asked. "More than I should, probably less than you need." "Then we have something to work with," he said. He took the whiskey from the cabinet, poured a small measure into a glass, and set it in front of her on a side table. He did not pour one for himself. "You must be hungry," he said. "You are going to feed me and negotiate at the same time. You are injured and you have been running for 2 hours. You will think more clearly when you are not in physical distress." He moved toward a second door at the far end of the corridor. "I will have food brought, and then I will explain exactly what Petter's letter means, what it will cost us both to act on it, and what I intend to do about Lord Caesar." She picked up the whiskey. "You said us." He paused in the doorway. "Blood law brought you to my door," he said. "But something kept you from running when every instinct you possess must have been screaming for the exit." He looked back at her, and there was nothing distant in his expression now, just something measured and real. That kind of courage does not belong locked in a room. He left. She drank the whiskey. Her hand, she noted, had stopped shaking. The food that arrived was from a restaurant 2 streets away, delivered by a young vampire who moved with the careful deference of someone early in their immortal career, and very aware that they were serving in Sorin Valtieri's private corridor. It was warm and substantial, lamb and roasted vegetables and bread that was still faintly heated from the oven, and Aurora ate with the practical urgency of someone who had not stopped moving long enough to eat in 6 hours. Sorin returned while she was finishing and sat across from her, in an armchair that suited him the way throne rooms suit kings, as though the furniture had arranged itself around him rather than the other way around. "Tell me how you came to be in Petai's employ," he said. She told him, with the kind of honesty that came from understanding that lies would be detected, and that the situation had moved far beyond the point where deception served her. She had been a researcher in London, academic work in Eastern European history, and she had followed a thread about vampire courts in Budapest, not because she believed it was literal, but because the historical documentation was extraordinary. When the documentation turned out to be both literal and current, she had made a choice that most people would have made differently, and contacted the source of the documents rather than burning them. That source had been Petir Vasil. "He was careful with me," she said. "He explained what I was dealing with in stages, so I had time to adjust. He never put me in unnecessary danger. Tonight was not his plan." "No," Sorin agreed. "It was Cesar's. He moved 3 weeks earlier than my intelligence suggested he would." He looked at the sealed envelope he had placed on the side table. Petir's source died before the message could be updated, but the core of what he discovered is intact. His jaw was tight. "Cesar has acquired a weapon. It is not a metaphor. It is a specific object, a blade forged from sanctified silver during the 14th century, during the First Purge, designed specifically to kill a vampire of royal blood." "How specific?" "Specific enough that it has my family's name etched into the crossguard," Sorin said evenly. "It was made for my great-grandfather and was believed destroyed. Cesar has spent 40 years finding it." Aurora put down her fork. "He has had a specific plan to kill you for 40 years. He has had ambition for 2 centuries. The plan is only 40 years old." She looked at him across the space of the private corridor. The blue tapestries and the warm light and the stone that smelled of centuries, and she felt something shift in the way she was understanding the situation. Not the politics of it, the personal weight of it, the idea of 40 years of targeted, patient hatred aimed at a specific living being. "That is a very long time to be someone's objective," she said. "It is the nature of immortal grudges," he said. "They have more time to ferment. What did you do to him?" There was a pause. "I dissolved his court," Sorin said. 112 years ago. He was running an operation that violated 4 blood laws and was feeding unchecked through the human population. I dissolved his court, bound him from forming another for 60 years, and stripped his title." He said it without apology. "He rebuilt. He is more careful now, more patient. And you have lived with the knowledge that he is patient and waiting for a century." "Yes, that would affect a person." "I am not a person," he said lightly. "You know what I mean." He was quiet for a moment, and in that moment she saw it again, that thing behind his composed expression, old and tired and human in spite of everything. "Yes," he said, "I know what you mean." She leaned forward, elbows on the table. "All right, so Cesar has the blade, has an alliance with the Eastern Court, and is planning to move against you. What is stopping him from simply doing it?" "Politics," Sorin said. "Even with the alliance, killing a Valtieri requires justification under blood law. He needs a cause. He needs to trigger a conflict that allows him to invoke the old codes and act openly." He stood, moving toward the wall, hands clasped behind his back, with the energy of someone who thought best in motion. "His plan, according to Petai's intelligence, is to stage an incident that appears to come from my court. An attack on a neutral territory, something that will give the Eastern Court grounds to act." "A false flag," Aurora said. He turned to look at her. "Military history," she said. "It is a very old strategy." "It is," he agreed, "and it will work, unless I can prove the staging before it happens, which requires the source inside Cesar's court, who is dead, who was dead. Petir's letter includes a name I did not have before. A second source, one Petir had not yet activated, a woman named Mira Salt, who works as an archivist inside Cesar's estate." He picked up the letter. "She does not know she has been identified as a potential ally. She does not know Petir is dead, and she will not survive long once Cesar realizes she exists, which he will, the moment he understands exactly how much Petir knew." "So the window is narrow," Aurora said. "Very." She looked at her bandaged shoulder, then at the door, then back at Sorin. I can reach her, she said. No, I am human. I move through the human world. I know Budapest. I know Cesar's people have been watching me, which means I know how to move where they are watching, and I can also move where they are not. She kept her voice steady. You cannot walk into Cesar's territory to make contact. Any vampire you send will be noticed, but a human courier who is already known as Petty's employee, who can plausibly be moving through the city trying to flee, who can walk into a public archive on legitimate human business. You would be walking into the most dangerous territory in this city, Sorin said. There was an edge to his voice now, controlled but present. You have been running from Cesar's people for 2 hours. They will be looking for you. They will be looking for me to run away from them, Aurora said. Not toward them. There is a difference. He was silent for a long moment. She could see the calculation moving behind his dark eyes, the same thing she had observed in her own reflection when making decisions she did not entirely want to make but understood were necessary. I will not send you into that alone, he said. You could not send your people either way. Any vampire Cesar sees near me will confirm that I delivered the message, and then mere assault becomes worthless to us, because he will eliminate everyone connected to his archive the moment he suspects a leak. Sorin crossed back to the table. He stood over it, looking at her, and the proximity was different from before. Less clinical. More like the way people look at each other when they are deciding whether to trust something that experience tells them is risky. There is a third option, he said. I could keep you safe here, inside Bloodlaw, and activate a different channel to reach mere assault. It would take longer, and there is a real probability that Cesar acts before we are positioned. But you would not be in danger. And the truce collapses, Aurora said. And however many people depend on that truce, human and vampire both, pay the price. Yes, then it is not a real option, she said. It is just the option where I feel safer while worse things happen. He looked at her. Something passed through his expression that she did not have a name for yet. You are 26 years old, he said. 27. Last month. You are 27 years old, and you have been involved in this world for less than a year. And you are sitting in a vampire court with a blade wound in your shoulder, arguing me into letting you walk into enemy territory. I am arguing you into a tactical decision that happens to require me, she said. It is not emotional, it is practical. Nothing about this is purely practical, Sorin said. She looked up at him. He was close enough that she could see the precise dark rings of his irises, and the way his breath, cool and even, moved the air between them. No, she agreed. But that does not make it wrong. He straightened. He looked at the ceiling for a moment, as if consulting something older than the room. Sleep first, he said. We will move in the morning when the day crowds the streets. I will have quarters prepared for you, and you will have a plan? I will have a plan, he said. She nodded and stood, and as she gathered herself and moved toward the door he indicated, she stopped. Sorin, she said. He turned, thank you, for not dismissing me. He held her gaze for a moment, and in it she read something she did not analyze too carefully, only registered as honest. Peter trusted you, he said. That is not a small thing. She slept in a room hung with dark curtains and furnished with quiet luxury, the kind of room that had been comfortable for a very long time. She woke before dawn and found clothing folded at the foot of the bed, practical and in her size, dark so as not to show stains. And she understood that someone had thought about what she would need before she had thought to ask. Sorin was waiting for her in his private study when she emerged, seated at a desk covered in maps of the city, both modern and historical, layered over one another in a way that showed the underground arteries of Budapest alongside its surface streets. He had clearly not slept, which was, she recalled, consistent with vampire nature, though she had not entirely internalized the full texture of what that meant, until she saw him there at 4 in the morning, looking as precisely composed as he had in the throne room, if somewhat more human in the privacies of a lamplit room, with books stacked around him and one sleeve rolled slightly back. I have a route, he said without preamble. The city archive where mere assault works opens at 9. Cesar's surveillance in that district runs on a rotation that changes at 8:45. There is a window of approximately 12 minutes between the old team pulling back and the new team getting eyes on the relevant street. 12 minutes is a tight window. Yes. He spread the map. But the archive's side entrance is on a lane that Cesar's people have historically undervalued because it is a public thoroughfare with high human traffic. They avoid it during daylight because they are careful about exposure. He pointed to the lane on the map. You go in the side, you have a cover. What cover? He passed her a folder. Inside was an identity card from the University of Budapest's history department, a research access card for the archive, and a letter from a faculty administrator, all plausible and detailed. She raised her eyes from the folder. You made these overnight. I have resources. These are remarkably good forgeries. They are not forgeries, he said. The faculty administrator is a person who owes me a significant favor and did not ask questions. She looked at the credentials again. And once I am inside, you find Mira Salt. You tell her that Petir sent you, that he is gone, and that you are here to offer her extraction and safety in exchange for whatever intelligence she has about the staged incident, specifically the when and where. You do not spend more than 8 minutes inside. You leave through the same entrance. I will be on the street. You, Aurora said, outside, during daylight. The sun is still low in November's mornings. I will be covered, and I will be close enough that if anything goes wrong, I can reach you in seconds. If you are burned, I will not be burned in 12 minutes of November morning in a covered lane, he said. It was not impatience. It was the flat certainty of someone who had calculated the risk thoroughly, and did not need to be talked out of caution they had already applied. And I will not send you in without being present. That is not a negotiation. She looked at him for a moment, this ancient, composed, dangerous man who had planned a protection detail before she had finished sleeping, who had thought of her clothing and her cover story, and the rotation of the enemy's surveillance before she had asked him to. All right, she said. He looked back at the map, and she saw the faint tightening of something in his jaw that might, in a different register, have been relief. The city in November was cold and blue-grey, and beautiful, the river catching light from a sky the color of pewter, the bridges strung with mist. Aurora moved through it the way she had learned to move since August. Head up, pace purposeful, neither the tourist wandering nor the hunted fleeing, just a person with somewhere to be. Sorin walked 3 paces behind her and to her left, hat low, gloved, collar up. He moved like he always moved, with that unhurried certainty that parted sidewalk crowds without effort. She had to suppress the instinct to look back at him, because every time she did, the quality of his presence caught her off guard. The simple fact of him, in the open world, ancient and contained, and watching her with an attention that felt like a hand at her back. At 8:52 she turned into the lane. The archive's side entrance was set into a pale stone wall, modest, marked only by a small brass plate. She pressed the research card to the reader and the door clicked open. Inside, the archive smelled of paper and preservation fluid and time. She moved through the public entrance hall to the records department and asked a tired administrator for access to the early medieval tax documentation for the Pest district. She mentioned she was continuing work left by a colleague who was unavailable. She used Petir's name. The administrator pointed her to room 4. In room 4, behind a desk of catalogued manuscript boxes, was a woman in her mid-30s with the look of someone who had been quietly careful for a very long time. Sharp eyes. Measured stillness. A slight pause when Aurora entered that lasted half a second longer than curiosity warranted. Aurora sat across from her and opened the research folder without looking up. Mira Salt, she said quietly. The woman's stillness deepened. Petir Vasil sent me, Aurora said. He cannot come himself. I do not know anyone by that name. Mira said, careful. You do, Aurora said. She still did not look up from the folder. And you are frightened, which I understand, because he told me this would be frightening and that I needed to be patient and clear. So I am going to be both. She turned a page. He is gone 2 days ago, but the work is not gone and you are not alone, and there is a way out if you want it. She finally looked up. What I need from you is a date and a location, the staged incident. Caesar's people call it the turning. What do you know about when it happens? Mira looked at her for a long moment. Then she leaned forward slowly and said in a voice so low it barely displaced the air between them. 4 days. The old textile warehouse on Soroksari Road. He is moving the weapon there the night before. The incident is framed as a Valtieri raid. Is there a name we can take to court? Documentation? Mira reached into the box she was cataloguing and removed a small folded paper that had clearly been waiting there. Transfer documentation for the blade. Cesar's seal. He was careless about the chain of custody records because he never expected anyone inside to notice. She pushed it across the table. This is why Petir was watching me. Aurora took the paper, slid it into the research folder, closed it. You need to leave, she said. Not tomorrow, today. Petir arranged for someone to help. That arrangement still holds. There is a contact at the Hotel Gerbode, a man named Tomas, who will know what to do if you say the word Amber. Mira looked at her. Something in the careful stillness of her face broke, briefly, into something that was almost gratitude. Who are you? She asked. Someone who was also in the wrong place at the right time, Aurora said. She left room 4 at 9 minutes past her arrival. The lane was quiet. Sorin materialized from the doorway of a passage, so naturally that someone who did not know to look would have missed him entirely. He fell into step beside her, not behind her this time, but beside, and she was acutely aware of the difference. I have it, she said quietly. She heard the almost imperceptible exhale of his breath. The first thing he had done that was entirely without control. 4 days, she said. Soroksari Road warehouse and documentation. She patted the folder. They walked another half a block before he said, You were 8.5 minutes. I know, I was counting. A pause. Then, so quiet she almost missed it. Well, done. She had the absurd and inconvenient sensation of warmth moving through her chest that had nothing to do with the cold morning air. Back inside the court, the documentation was verified by 2 of Sorin's oldest advisors, Lord Benedict, a vampire whose age was implied by the deliberate economy of all his movements, and Lady Valka, whose silver hair and silver expression made Aurora feel assessed in a way that was not entirely comfortable. The seal is genuine, Lady Valka said, turning the paper in her ancient fingers. This is enough to bring before the tripartite assembly. It needs to be brought in 3 days, Sorin said, before Cesar can move. The assembly requires 48 hours notice of an emergency session, Lord Benedict said. Then we file today, Sorin said. I want runners to all 3 assembly contacts within the hour. The court began to move around them with the precise urgency of an operation that had been waiting only for the right signal. Aurora stood in the center of it, slightly to the side, watching Sorin direct his people, and she thought that in the 3 days she had been peripherally adjacent to Petir's world. She had never actually seen power exercised with such economy. No raised voice, no visible aggression. Just a man who understood exactly what needed to happen and communicated it with a clarity that left no room for confusion. She also thought that she had better find something useful to do, or she would stand here thinking about his jaw again, which was not a productive use of her time. Lord Benedict found her at the edge of the room. The human girl, he said, not unkindly, observationally. Aurora Marwood, she said. You went into the archive this fountain, he said. Yes. And you came out. Also, yes. He studied her with the kind of careful attention that was clearly habitual to very old beings. I have seen 200 years of Lord Valtieri's choices. I have seen him make decisions about people, about resources, about risk. He is not careless. I know, she said. He was not careless with me. No, Benedict agreed. He was not. He paused. You should know that his protection of you will be noted. It will be used by Cesar, by everyone who watches him. You are the first human he has brought under blood law protection in 40 years. The last one was Petir Vasil. She absorbed this. What happened to the one before Petir? Benedict's expression did not change, but something moved through it. She died, not by Cesar's hand, by accident in the way that humans die. She had been his intelligence contact for 2 decades. He paused. It cost him considerably. She looked across the room at Sorin, who was standing over a table of documents, reading something with that focused, deliberate attention. Thank you for telling me, she said. It is not sentiment, Benedict said. You should understand the full context of what you have walked into. I think I am beginning to, she said. The next 3 days were dense and strange, and at their edges, unexpectedly intimate. She worked. She was not given a passive role or a polite corner to sit in, which she would have refused anyway. Sorin asked her to cross-reference Mira Salt's documentation against the historical records she actually knew. The genuine scholarship she had arrived in Budapest with, because there were elements of the blade's provenance that touched metal trading routes she understood better than anyone in the court. They worked long hours at his desk, across from each other in the lamplight, and she learned the texture of how he thought, precise and layered, capable of holding 6 simultaneous considerations and weighting them in real time. He learned that she could match him across the table, that when she pushed back on his reasoning, it was because she had found the gap in it, and he learned to look for her expression when he presented an argument, because her face told him whether he had missed something before she said a word. On the second evening, when the courtiers had retired and the study was quiet, he poured 2 glasses of the whiskey she had noticed that first night. He set one in front of her without comment. She looked at it. "I thought vampires did not drink." "I do not drink it," he said, "but I find I keep it for people who do." She wrapped her hands around the glass. Outside, the city hummed with traffic and light. "Tell me something true about yourself," she said. "Not strategy, not history. Something real." He was quiet for a moment. "I remember every person I have failed to protect," he said. "I have an excellent memory. This is sometimes a considerable difficulty." "That is real," she said. "You asked." "I know." She looked at the amber in the glass. "I remember every decision I have made that turned out to be wrong. I replay them. I try to find the moment I could have chosen differently. Do you find it? Usually. That is the worst part." He looked at her across the desk, and the quality of his attention was different here, in the private dark of the study, different from the court and the corridor and the strategy sessions. Less managed, more honest. "You were not wrong to come to my court," he said. "I know," she said, "but I was lucky." "You were both," he said, "and you were brave, which is different from either." She held his gaze. The lamp between them cast a warmth that the chandeliers did not, and in it he looked almost like someone who had not been carrying in centuries. "I am sorry about Petter," she said. He was quiet for a moment. He knew the risk. He would not have thanked me for mourning rather than acting on what he died to send. "You can do both," she said. "You are allowed." He looked at her. "Humans say that," he said, "as though grief has a permission structure." "Maybe it does for you," she said. "Maybe being this old means the permission has to come from somewhere outside the grief itself." He was very still, and then something in his face that was usually composed and controlled shifted into something older and quieter and achingly honest. "Perhaps," he said. They stayed in the study for another hour, not talking about strategy, talking about other things. Budapest in a different century and London in winter, and what it meant to know too much about a world that most people chose not to see. She told him about the first historical document she had found that she could not explain as fiction. He told her what the city had looked like when its current street map was farmland and riverbank. When she finally went to bed, she lay awake for a while, listening to the old building settle around her, feeling the shape of where she was in the way you do when somewhere has started to become, without your deciding it, somewhere you do not want to leave. The tripartite assembly convened in a building beneath the chain bridge, accessible through a door in the bridge's eastern pylon that opened only to specific bloodlines, which meant Aurora entered on Sorin's arm with his hand over the reader and his shoulder inches from hers. The assembly chamber was circular and old, lit by hundreds of small candles despite the electrical age, and full of vampires who looked at Aurora with the careful measuring attention of beings who had seen every kind of human behavior and were assessing what category this one fell into. There were 3 courts represented, Sorin's. The Eastern Court, whose representative was a woman named Irina Korvath, tall and silver-haired and watching everything with calculated eyes, and the Neutral Court, the Breslin House, who were the oldest arbiters in Eastern Europe and whose 2 representatives sat in silence like statues, waiting to become relevant. Lord Caesar was not present. He had declined the summons, which, under blood law, was itself a statement. "His absence is a response," Lord Benedict murmured, standing at Sorin's left. "It is an answer," Sorin said. Aurora stood at Sorin's right. She had the documentation. She had been startled that morning when Sorin asked her to present it herself. She had expected him to take it, to speak for the record, to operate in the political language of the court while she stayed background. "You recovered the intelligence," he said. The assembly will ask how it was obtained. I would rather they hear it from the person who had painted it than have my account of her account. You trust me with it, she said. I trust you with everything that matters, he said, and then turned back to the documents on his desk as if this were a simple logistical point. And she stood in his study with that sentence moving through her like something she could not yet fully look at directly. Before the assembly, she presented the documentation precisely and without embellishment. She explained Petir's network, the chain of intelligence, Mir Assault's role, and what she had provided. She answered questions from the Breslin arbiters with the clarity of someone who had spent years in academic work and understood what a primary source was and how to defend its provenance. Irina Korvath of the Eastern Court watched her throughout with an expression that was difficult to read. When Aurora finished, Korvath said, "You are not afraid." "I am somewhat afraid," Aurora said, "but I am more committed to accuracy." A pause. "The documentation appears genuine," Korvath said. She turned to the Breslin arbiters. "The Eastern Court withdraws its alliance with Caesar, pending investigation." The political ground shifted in that room the way tides shift. Without announcement, with enormous force, Sorin, standing at the table's head, said nothing. But when he looked at Aurora, she read in him something she had been watching build across 3 days of work and whiskey and lamplit honesty. Something wide and careful and real. The aftermath took hours. Blood law was invoked. Caesar's resources were frozen pending formal investigation. The Blades transfer documents were entered into the Assembly's permanent record. The staged incident would not happen. The truce held. Aurora was in the corridor outside the chamber, sitting on a stone bench and experiencing the particular exhaustion that follows several days of sustained, high-stakes focus. When Sorin found her, he sat beside her, not across a desk or a table this time. Beside her, close enough that the cool air that moved with him reached her. "It is done," he said. "Good," she said. "You should rest." "In a moment," she said. "I want to sit with it being over for a moment." "Yes," he said, and he did not move. They sat in the old stone corridor under the river, the city moving overhead, blood law written into the walls around them. And the silence between them was the particular kind that is comfortable because nothing in it needs to be filled. After a while, she said, "What happens now?" "Caesar will face formal proceedings," and Sorin said. "It will take months. He will lose considerably. He will not attempt anything of this scope again." "I meant to me," Aurora said. He was quiet. "You are under blood law protection," he said. "That does not expire." "That is not what I meant either," she said. He turned to look at her, and she turned to look at him, and they were very close on the narrow bench in the old corridor. And the thing that had been building across 3 days and 1 crisis and 2 glasses of whiskey and 100 moments of honest attention was right there between them, too clear to pretend not to see. "Aurora," he said. "I know," she said. "I know it is complicated. I know what I am and what you are and how long you have existed and how brief I am by comparison." I am not finished," she said gently. He stopped. "I know all of those things," she said. "And I am choosing, clearly and with my eyes open, to say this anyway, because I have learned in the last 3 days that the correct decision and the comfortable decision are different things, and I have never been very good at choosing comfort over correct." She held his gaze, steady. "I do not want to leave. I do not mean I want to stay in the court. I mean I do not want to stop." She gestured at the space between them. "At 3 days and a desk and the archive and the corridor and all of it. Whatever this is." He looked at her for a long moment, and she saw him working through something, felt the weight of it. The century of careful management that was trying to assess whether what he was feeling was something he could trust himself to act on. "I lost someone," he said. "Some time ago, a person I had let matter to me. She was human. She was brilliant, and she was not frightened of anything she understood, and she died in the way humans die, and I was not there, and I could not." He stopped. "It taught me to keep distance." "I know," Aurora said. "Benedict told me." He looked at her. "Not to manipulate you," she said. "He told me so I would understand the full context. I am not trying to argue you out of your grief or your caution.
I am just telling you that I know, and that I am here anyway."
And that distance is a choice, not a requirement. Something broke open very quietly in his expression. "You are not afraid of what I am," he said. "Not a question." An observation that was also, she thought, a wonder. "I know what you are," she said. "I have known for 3 days. I have watched you lead and protect and plan and grieve and pour whiskey you do not drink for people who need it, and I know exactly what you are." She reached out and put her hand over his, cool and still on the bench between them. "I am not afraid." He looked down at her hand on his. He turned his hand slowly and closed it around hers. "This will not be simple," he said. "I know. The court will have opinions." "The court can manage its opinions," she said. A sound escaped him that was, she realized with a private delight, a laugh, genuine and brief and real. "You are extraordinary," he said. "I am practical," she said. "Both," he said. "Definitively both." And he brought her hand up slowly and pressed his lips to her knuckles with a formality that was centuries old, and at the same time entirely specific to this moment, to her, to the quiet corridor and the city overhead, and the end of something dangerous and the beginning of something else. She felt it everywhere. She did not pull her hand back. The months that followed were not simple, as he had warned. The court had opinions, as she had predicted, and she let them have those opinions without apparent concern, which frustrated the opinion holders considerably. Lady Valka made several pointed observations about the precedent of human attachment. Lord Benedict watched Aurora with increasing respect and decreasing pointed observation. There were formal proceedings against Cesar that required testimony, documentation management, and 3 separate assembly sessions. Aurora became part of the Valtieri court's intelligence record not as a protected visitor, but as a functioning member of its information network. Her human expertise and her ability to move through the city above ground proving as useful as Sorin had seen from the beginning. She moved her things from her apartment to the court's residential wing, not because she was asked to and not as a romantic gesture, but because it was practical, and she had been spending so little time at the apartment that it seemed wasteful to maintain it. She told Sorin this very directly. He said nothing, but the rooms she was given were in the section of the court closest to his study, and the connecting corridor was never locked. Myra Salt was extracted safely by Tomas, who turned out to be one of Sorin's longest-tenured human contacts, and resettled in Vienna with a new identity and research work she found satisfying. She and Aurora exchanged occasional messages through Sorin's secure network. The truce held. Spring came to Budapest, and the river lost its winter grey and turned green-blue and bright, and Aurora walked along it in the morning sometimes. Knowing Sorin watched the city from the upper windows in the hour before dawn when the light was still safe, knowing he could see her, and feeling that knowledge as something warm and steady at her back. In April, he came to the embankment himself, just before true sunrise, wrapped and careful, and walked beside her for 20 minutes while the sky turned pink over the bridges. "You are risking sunburn," she said. "I have done the calculation," he said. "You always have." "I wanted to see what you see when you walk here," he said. She looked at the river, at the bridges and the Buda hills and the morning light on the castle across the water. "It is beautiful," she said. "Yes," he said, and when she glanced at him, he was not looking at the river. She felt the warmth in her chest that she had stopped being surprised by and started simply living inside. In the court, the formal question of Aurora's status came to a head in June, when Lady Valka raised it openly in a convened council session. Not maliciously, Aurora understood, but because the court needed clarity on protocol, blood law, and the nature of the arrangement. It was a political necessity, not a personal attack. Sorin handled it with characteristic economy. "Aurora Marwood is under permanent blood law protection as a member of my household," he said. "If the court requires a formal designation, she holds the title of Valtieri Anchor. It is an old designation. It has been used before." He looked around the table. "It means she is mine to protect. It means any action against her is an action against me. It means she speaks with my trust, which is not given easily and is not revocable by council vote." He paused. "If anyone at this table has an objection that is based on principle rather than discomfort, I will hear it. If it is based on discomfort, you will manage it on your own time." No principled objections were raised. Aurora, sitting 3 chairs down from him at the council table because she attended council now, met Lady Valka's gaze and held it. Valka, after a moment, gave the faintest nod, not warmth exactly, But acknowledgement, that evening in the study, Aurora set a glass of whiskey on Sorin's side of the desk. He looked at it. "I do not drink, I know," she said. "But you looked like you needed someone to pour one for you." He looked at her, and something in his expression was entirely unguarded, the way it only was important in the lamplight, when the court was somewhere else and the city was quiet. "I did not know," he said, "when you walked through those doors, what you would cost me. And now? Now I think cost was the wrong word." He picked up the glass and turned it in his fingers, not drinking it but holding the warmth of it. "I have been careful for a very long time. Careful about distance, careful about attachment, careful about what I allow myself to want." He set the glass down and looked across the desk at her. "You made careful seem like cowardice." She stood and walked around the desk, and he turned in his chair to face her as she came, and she sat on the edge of the desk beside him, rather than across from him, the way they had spent months working, and looked down at him from this new proximity. "It was not cowardice," she said. "It was grief. There is a difference." He looked up at her. This close, she could see everything in his face that he usually kept managed and controlled. All of it available now, the oldness and the loss and the careful love he had built walls around for decades. "Aurora," he said quietly. "Yes," she said, but before he asked, he reached up and put his hand against her jaw. Cool and careful and entirely deliberate, she leaned into it. "I do not know how to do this gently," he said. "Everything about what I am is intensity. I am asking you to understand that before, Sorin," she said. "Yes. I have watched you for 6 months," she said. "I know exactly what you are. I am not asking for gentle. I am asking for honest." Something in him settled then, like a held breath released, like a tide making landfall. "You are everything I did not expect to find again," he said. She bent down and kissed him. He was still for one moment, just one. The stillness of something very old being asked to believe something it had stopped hoping for. And then he kissed her back with a care and an intensity that was, as he had said, entirely his, unrestrained and deeply felt and absolutely honest. She had been right about him, she thought. She had been right about all of it. The summer ran long and golden in Budapest, and the court softened around them by degrees, the way institutions soften when a change is not removed but integrated, when the newcomer proves not to be a disruption but a weight that makes the whole thing more stable. Aurora built a life inside the old stone and tapestried walls, her books alongside his, her research in the archives useful to the court's intelligence work, her presence in council sessions increasingly taken for granted, in the way that useful people come to be taken for granted, with gratitude underneath the assumption. She learned the full texture of what he was, the blood law and the sunlight and the ancient codes and the immortal memory. She learned what it felt like to love someone who remembered things she could not imagine and feared losing things he could not prevent. She learned that the weight of centuries on a person with genuine honor and genuine grief was a weight that deserved to be held gently, and she learned that she was good at holding it. He learned her. He learned the way she thought, and the way she argued, and the way she went quiet when something was difficult rather than louder, which was the opposite of the people he had known for most of his long life, and he learned to read her quiet the way she read his stillness. He learned that she did not need to be protected from information or difficulty, only from the things she genuinely could not fight. And he learned the difference between those things more carefully than he had learned anything in decades. Caesar's proceedings concluded in October. He was formally stripped of title, his remaining court dissolved under blood law, his resources held in trust by the assembly for a period of 50 years. It was, Benedict told Aurora quietly, the most thorough legal dismantling of a vampire court since the mid-19th century. Caesar himself was bound from reforming any alliance for 100 years, which was, in the Assembly's view, the equivalent of a full stop. The blade was surrendered to the Breslin House for permanent archival custody. It would not be used. Aurora watched the formal closing of the proceedings from the Assembly gallery and thought of Petir, who had known this was necessary and had chosen the most dangerous possible path to make it happen. She thought of Mira Salt, who had spent years quietly watching and waiting for the right person to pass the right paper to. She thought of the many invisible acts of courage that made large things possible, the ones that never get formal recognition, because the people who performed them are not there for the ceremony. She said something of this to Sorin that evening. He listened. Then he said, "Petir would have been pleased. He cared considerably more about outcomes than recognition. He would have liked seeing you like this," she said. "Like what?" She looked at him, at the way he was sitting with her in the study. At ease in a way she had not seen in the first months, the careful management of distance put down like something he no longer needed to carry. "Happy," she said. He was quiet for a moment. "Yes," he said. "I think he would have. In November." The anniversary of the night she had walked bleeding through the obsidian doors, Sorin took her up, through the court to a roofed terrace she had not known existed, a narrow stone platform with an iron railing where the city spread in every direction, glittering and alive. "You know you are the only human who has come through those doors and not been destroyed," he said. "I had heard something to that effect," she said. "Your court made the point fairly forcefully when I arrived." "They were not wrong about the probability," he said. "Probability is not destiny," she said. He stood beside her, at the railing, the city below them and the sky above, and she felt his arm come around her shoulders with the quiet certainty of something that had stopped being tentative and become simply true. "I am going to ask you something," he said. "All right. And I want you to know that whatever you answer, nothing changes. Your position here, your safety. He stopped, tried again. "My feelings are not conditional on your answer." She turned to look at him. He was looking at the city, the way he sometimes did when he was working up to saying something real. "Sorin," she said. He looked at her. "Ask," she said. "I want you to stay," he said, "permanently. Not as Valtieri anchor, not under blood law. Not as a member of the household. As mine and I as yours. As the person I come home to and the person I send away from danger, and the person whose opinion I want on everything, and whose hand I want in mine when there is nothing more urgent to hold." He held her gaze with the steadiness of someone who was entirely certain of what he was saying, and uncertain only of what she would say. "I know what it would mean. I know what the future looks like if you say yes, and I know what I lose if the answer is no, and I am asking because Petir once told me that the great tragedy of long life is not the losses, but the things you refuse to begin." She was quiet for a moment. She looked at the city, and then at him. "Yes," she said. "I was not going to say anything else." He exhaled. She put her head against his shoulder, and he pulled her closer, and the city burned with light below them, and the old stone of the court rose around them, and the river moved through Budapest the way it had always moved, through centuries and wars and courts and treaties and love affairs, between the unlikely, constant and unhurried, and entirely unconcerned with what anyone thought should be possible. She thought of the moment she had come through those doors, bleeding and certain and terrified underneath the certain, holding a dead man's letter and walking toward the most dangerous person in the city because it was the only logical thing to do. She thought of how every decision that felt impossible had led here, to this railing and this arm round her shoulders and this city spread like a jewel below them. She thought that Petir had known what he was doing when he pressed the letter into her hands and said, "Run." He had always known exactly who to trust. "What are you thinking?" Sorin asked. "That I am glad I did not stop running until I got here," she said. He pressed his lips to the top of her head, an old gesture, tender and deliberate. "I am glad you did not stop either," he said. The night spread out around them, vast and beautiful, and the court below them hummed with the life of centuries, and none of it was simple, and none of it was certain, and all of it was in the particular way of things that have been chosen clearly, and kept faithfully entirely enough. She stayed. They lived in the old stone city, under ancient codes and modern skies, in the space between the world above and the world below, where blood law and human courage and the slow, deliberate work of trust had built something stronger than either of them had known how to build alone. The court in time stopped seeing her as the human who had walked through the wrong door. They began to see her as the woman who had walked through exactly the right one, and who had, in doing so, brought something back into their ancient world that it had needed for a very long time. Not just information, not just courage. The reminder that even the oldest things can begin again. And somewhere in Vienna, Mira Salt has rested a message on a secure network, and smiled and went back to her archives, and Thomas in the Hotel Gerbaud raised a glass to no one in particular, and the bridge of the assembly chamber held the weight of the city, crossing it, and the river ran on, faithful and unhurried, through everything it had ever seen.